Hi, my name is Kristie Petillo, and I will be doing this presentation on cerebral palsy. To define cerebral palsy in a sentence, cerebral palsy is a condition most often caused by brain damage before or at birth, which leads to impaired muscle coordination known as spastic paralysis and/or other disabilities. The mental capabilities of a person with cerebral palsy are often not affected by the condition, as the main traits of the disability affect muscle and coordination. I will go into this further later in the presentation. Cerebral palsy is classified as a physical or health disability. Specifically, it is an orthopedic impairment. The legal definition of the orthopedic impairment category of physical and health disabilities from the 2004 IDEA legislation is as follows. Orthopedic impairment means a severe orthopedic impairment that adversely affects a child's educational performance. This term includes impairments caused by congenital anomaly, impairments caused by disease, and impairments from other causes. Now, the state of New Jersey, confusingly enough, does not define cerebral palsy in the terms of an orthopedic impairment or specifically as a physical or health disability. It doesn't use that terminology. New Jersey defines cerebral palsy as a developmental disability, a term they use to cover many things. According to the New Jersey Developmentally Disabled Rights Act, the phrasing is that a developmental disability is defined as a severe chronic disability of a person which 1. Is attributable to a mental or physical impairment or a combination of mental physical impairments. 2. It manifests before the age of 22. 3. It is likely to continue indefinitely. Cerebral palsy is a lifelong condition. 4. It results in substantial functional limitation in 3 or more of the following areas of major life activity. That is, self-care, receptive and expressive language, learning, mobility, self-direction, and capacity for independent living or economic self-sufficiency. 5. Reflects the need for a combination of and sequence of special interdisciplinary or generic care treatments or other services which are of lifelong or extended durations and are individually planned and coordinated. Developmental disability includes, but is not limited to, severe disabilities attributable to mental retardation, autism, cerebral palsy, epilepsy, spinal bifida, and other neurological impairments where the above criteria is met. So New Jersey lumps cerebral palsy in with autism. I don't know if I would have personally grouped it that way, but I'm not a lawmaker, so that's just the way the cookie crumbles. Cerebral palsy is diagnosed within the first few years of life. Even though CP usually occurs before or at birth, it can take some time before an infant or toddler is diagnosed because it is difficult to assess the mobility level and motor skills of a newborn. There is an article from Fun New Jersey magazine, which I found on funnewjersey.com, which alongside the New Jersey Cerebral Palsy Foundation, they made an amazingly detailed list of all of the symptoms that go along with the cerebral palsy condition. If you are looking for signs of cerebral palsy in a child, the main symptoms are abnormalities in muscle tone, coordination and control of movement, reflexes, posture, balance, gross motor function, fine motor function, and oral motor function. Cerebral palsy affects every person differently. These are the most common disabilities caused by cerebral palsy, but once again, each person affected has their own unique combination and severity of these symptoms. Many of these conditions can be positively affected by physical and speech therapy. Here comes some long lists and a lot of Latin that I'm about to butcher. Please bear with me. Muscle tone. 1. Hypotonia. This is when a child has less muscle tone or less muscle tension. Hands or feet or limbs appear relaxed or limp. Then there's hypertonia. It's the exact opposite. Hypertonia is increased muscle tone and increased muscle tension. It makes arms and legs appear rigid. Dystonia is when specific parts of the body fluctuate between hypertonia and hypotonia. Muscles fluctuate between increased and decreased level of muscle tone and tension. One day, these parts of the body can be loose, and the next they'll be tight and stiff. A mixed muscle tone is when different parts of the body are affected by either hypertonia or hypotonia. So perhaps the trunk of the body is hypertonic while the limbs are hypotonic. 5. Muscle spasms. These are uncontrollable and sometimes painful contractions of muscles. Clonus are regularly occurring muscle spasms in the ankles or wrists. And 6 is fixed joints. I'm not sure if I was keeping a numbered list the whole time. Either way, fixed joints are joints that are fused together and incapable of moving freely. Sometimes they're fixed like this because of hypertonia, when the muscles are completely rigid, or they may be fixed together due to birth abnormality. Next are differences in movement control and coordination. Because of this increased or decreased muscle tone, all people with cerebral palsy have some degree of difficulty when it comes to coordinating and controlling movements. It's pretty much the main symptom of the condition. These mobility and motor skill symptoms include muscle spasms. Once again, we were just over it. These are the occasional and painful and always involuntary movements of the arms and legs caused by hypertonic attacks where the muscles flex and refuse to relax again for a period of time. This includes clonus, overflexed joints, and fixed joints. 2. Dyskinetic or atheroid movements. These two muscle issues are caused by fluctuating muscle tones. Remember dystonia, where the muscles flex and then go limp, and flexing and then go limp. We did it in the first one. And lead to involuntary and uncontrollable movements that can worsen if the person is stressed. Then there's ataxic movement, and so ataxic movement issues mean that a person can have trouble balancing or have problems with fine motor skills, such as grabbing a pencil or pen, picking up small objects, turning pages in a book, gently placing objects down, or tying knots. And then 5 is disturbances in gait, which is a list within a list. Hold on. A gait disturbance means that the child with CP has difficulty moving their leg muscles in such a way that walking isn't steady and isn't easy. These can be broken down into further subcategories, such as out-toeing, which means the toes face out, in-toeing, which means the toes face in, a spastic gait, which means that one leg drags when walking, a spastic or scissor gait, which means that due to the hips flexing slightly, a child's stance may appear crouched, or with their knees and thighs gliding past each other, much like scissor blades do. Then there's a propulsive gait, which is walking in a hunched over and stiff position with their head and neck bent forward. A steppage gait, in this instance, the toes drag while walking. Limping is a wavy stride that results from a child placing more weight on one side than the other. And then there's toe walking, which is when you walk on your toes. Tiptoe. We are getting we're getting through this. We're getting there. Then there's oral motor skill problems. Difficulty with oral motor skills means that a child cannot move their mouth in the same way as a child without cerebral palsy. Signs of a motor skill impairment include drooling, trouble chewing and or swallowing, trouble speaking and or articulating, and problems breathing. Such conditions include verbal apraxia, the inability to clearly articulate words due to weakened brain signals to the muscles in the mouth. Oral apraxia, and this is when a child has problems with non-speaking mouth motions, so things like licking your lips, puckering your lips, puffing out your cheeks, and moving your tongue. Then there's ataxic dysarthria, which is a slower, more erratic and inarticulate speech caused by low muscle and breathing coordination. Then there's flaccid dysarthria, which is a whiny or nasally speech caused by the vocal cords not opening and closing properly, so it's a problem with the vocal cord muscles themselves. Then there's spastic dysarthria, which is strenuous and slow speech where the person affected typically has trouble with consonants. And then there's mixed dysarthria, which, just like everything else, people with CP can have combinations of just about everything. Lastly, there are the actual levels of CP. And so level 1 means that a person can walk without limitations. Level 2 means that they walk with limitations such as not being able to walk long distances, run, or jump. 3 means that they can walk indoors with handheld mobility equipment but require a wheelchair outdoors. And level 5, severe impairments and limitations to the trunk and the head, requiring use of wheelchair, physical assistance, and communication technology. I think if I went any farther into how cerebral palsy affects motor skills, we'd all quit. We'd all quit the video, including myself. So that is the main weakness of CP, is issues with motor skills, and so that, of course, does involve speech skills, just because of the oral mechanics of speech are affected by CP. However, as for the strengths, some of my favorite artists have cerebral palsy. Even before I did this project, because I read My Left Foot, with the Kristie Brown story, which is about an amazing poet and painter who figured out, or excuse me, really, it was his mother who figured out that he still had mobility in his left foot and almost no other mobility. And at a time where people with cerebral palsy were completely ignored or abandoned or worse, completely abused, she stood strong, and she had a dozen other kids, and she taught him how to write and read using strictly the mobility of his left foot. And he was a painter and a poet, as I said, which was amazing. But before I even read My Left Foot, I've been a Zach Anner fan for years. He's a YouTuber. I have a secret dream of being a comedy writer. So Anner's Workout Wednesdays, which is a YouTube show where he, a man with cerebral palsy, goes to the gym and teaches his viewers. It's absolutely hilarious. It's so upbeat, wholesome, and hilarious. Unlike many other YouTubers, his humor isn't self-deprecating. He doesn't wallow in the negatives or draw his jokes for making fun of himself. Another amazing comedian with cerebral palsy, Josh Blue, does focus mostly on making fun of his cerebral palsy and is also completely hilarious. So no digs against Josh Blue. I love him. But I'm a Zach Anner fan. He's motivational, and not in the patronizing, you're so inspirational kind of way, but he's motivational in the, yeah, we all have our issues, but try your best and see what happens kind of way. In another one of his videos that I'm only bringing up just to tie in how the mobility issues that come with cerebral palsy really do deeply affect their lives. In one of his videos that he did for the Cerebral Palsy Foundation, he filmed it for them with his friends, he is trying to go through one of the most accessible cities on earth, our very own New York, looking for a rainbow bagel. It takes him over an hour just to get out of his hotel because the elevator that he can get to is constantly too full for his wheelchair to fit in, and the only other way to get down is the elevators that are past the stairs. He ends up tummy surfing down the stairs to get to the other elevators, and his friends carry his chair. But that's just getting out of the hotel. I couldn't recommend the video more for anybody who's trying to go into special needs education, because it just shows how even with our best, I suppose I can't even call New York the best efforts for inclusive and accessible living, because I don't think they are the best efforts. But even in one of the most accessible cities on earth, it takes him hours. Even though there are elevators and ramps and short water fountains and this, that, the other, it doesn't make the city accessible, and it also doesn't even mean that those things, as they are accessible. And another comedian with cerebral palsy is Maysoon Zayed, and she's New Jersey born and raised. Zayed is the first person to ever perform comedy in Palestine and Jordan, stand-up comedy that and is credited as America's first Muslim woman comedian. And the irony that she is a stand-up, sit-down comedian is not lost on her. Her TED Talk is amazing. It has 4.8 million views. And besides her being hilarious, it also highlights perspective of the cerebral palsy life, both the strengths and the weaknesses. She tells a story about when she was in college for theater that I could not do justice, so instead I will include the clip here.
I went to college during affirmative action and got a sweet scholarship to ASU, Arizona State University, because I fit every single quota. I was like the pet lemur of the theater department. Everybody loved me. I did all the less than intelligent kids' homework. I got A's in all of my classes, A's in all of their classes. Every time I did a scene from The Glass Menagerie, my professors would weep. But I never got cast. Finally, my senior year, ASU decided to do a show called They Dance Real Slow in Jackson. It's a play about a girl with CP. I was a girl with CP. So I start shouting from the rooftops, I'm finally gonna get part. I have cerebral palsy. Free at last, free at last. Thank God almighty I'm free at last. I didn't get the part. Sherry Brown got the part. I went racing to the head of the theater department, crying hysterically like someone shot my cat, to ask her why. And she said it was because they didn't think I could do the stunts. I said, excuse me, if I can't do the stunts, neither can the character.
And so, of course, I'm not trying to say that everybody with cerebral palsy is amazingly hilarious. Going back to Kristie Brown, a lot of the stuff that he wrote is not very funny at all. A lot of it is sad or incredibly touching. It's not comedy, though. So I'm not trying to imply that all people with cerebral palsy are amazing comedians or that they should go into comedy. But I am trying to say that this spark of performance and artistry does seem to be a sign of, honestly, a lot of people who are differently abled, whether it's CP or fatigue disorders or many other things. I suppose that's what art is trying to channel your life into a way that other people can understand and relate to and draw from. And so it doesn't really surprise me that people with CP are incredible artists. Of course you can't say that for everybody. I'm not trying to make a generalization, but when it comes to the question, what are the strengths of CP? Of course, art and comedy are going to come to the front because they show what it is to survive in a world that in a way wasn't made for you, which is incredibly sad in its way, but that's where humor and beauty comes in. When the world itself isn't 100% welcoming and kind, even when it's not actively being mean, sometimes you do need to add your own humor and artistry to it. And that, I believe, you do see a lot with CP. In my experience, when handling children of different ability levels, especially in this case with cerebral palsy, where usually these children have complete learning ability, their issue is physical, it's bodily. I like to use a philosophy that I call parallel and perpendicular planning. I'm sure that there are actual educational terms for this. Like, I can't have come up with this, I know that. but it's just my way of describing these ideas, and I'll go into them further. So let's take an example where a group of children is playing the game Multiplication Rope Bridge. The story is that 4 to 8 kids of the class are on a rickety rope bridge over a ravine, just like in a jungle or an adventure movie. The rope bridge is represented by plate-sized circles on the floor. The only way the students can step forward on the rickety bridge is if they step together, but the only way to step forward is to answer a multiplication problem given to the whole group. Rhythm is kept with a drum or tambourine, and keeping the rhythm is important because the kids have to answer in one voice. If one person slips up, no one moves forward. If everyone gets it right, then they each get to jump forward a circle. Every round, another child finishes the bridge and goes to the end of the line, and then another child gets on the bridge and the pattern starts again, circling and circling as people get to keep jumping forward as they answer correctly in one voice. So getting students out of their chairs is an incredibly important part of education for me. I was, and in many ways still am, an incredibly fidgety learner. Being left alone with a textbook to memorize facts quietly at a desk is a personal hell for me. However, how should a teacher who wants to get their class up and on their feet handle a situation where one of their kids can't stand? In my mind, and of course I'm still just in intro classes, so I'm sure there are many more ways to handle this than just what I've come across at summer camps and tutoring lessons and things like that, and working in classrooms, blah, blah, blah. But in my mind, there are kind of 2 main ways to handle this scenario, and that's going back to those terms that I kind of made to describe this, which is the parallel route and the perpendicular route. The parallel route involves the student playing as close of a game as possible to the rest of the children. Perhaps a student with cerebral palsy's aide can assist them in their wheelchair from dot to dot, or maybe the student is in a motorized chair. If they are verbal, they can shout out their answers with the other students. If they are nonverbal and have a means of communication like a typing pad or a writing board, they can use those means. The parallel route means that you are trying to stay as close to the original mechanics of the activity or the lesson or the game as much as possible, and just allowing different ways to achieve the same mechanics. Games like multiplication tightrope are designed to be team building, and as important as the mathematics skills the children are practicing, they are also learning how to work together with empathy and enthusiasm. Instead of competition, it's a game based in cooperation and being a piece of a whole. Even in a classroom of all able-bodied students, it's that way. These morals are incredibly important to any classroom, not just one with differently abled children. And then there's the perpendicular route. In this case, should the student with cerebral palsy not be able to participate in the movement aspect of the game, even in their mobility device, I would try to enact a perpendicular route. Perhaps the kid gets to shake a rhythm egg as much as they please while you, the teacher, keep time with the main drum. Perhaps they choose a student to be their partner who will jump in their stead while they answer the questions to the beat from the position with you. Or perhaps their aide, or even you yourself will be that partner, and much to the joy of the students who will love seeing an adult jump around and act silly. Also, an incredibly important part, especially with students with CP, is to keep the students themselves in the loop. Ask them their opinions and give them options to choose from, and the opportunity to suggest their own opinions. Games and activities like this are there to make school engaging and to incite the other senses other than just the eyes, and the listening ears. Keeping that goal in mind, make a plan for the student with cerebral palsy that allows them to activate other senses and sensations. Playing with texture, temperature, noise, and having the opportunity for free, unjudged motion at whatever ability level is important for any child. They're important releases from the day. Sometimes, though, you gotta call a spade a spade. A student with cerebral palsy understands that they are different, and in a way, trying to never acknowledge that condition is in its own way patronizing. They understand that sometimes they must take a different route to the finish line than others. The important thing to teach the whole class is that there is no one right way to learn or to be. As for resources I would look for as a teacher of a child with cerebral palsy, there is the Special Education Support Services, or SES. Their goal is for individuals with special needs to achieve their highest accomplishments in school and experience every aspect of school life. This one isn't exactly just for cerebral palsy, but I would still reach out to them if that was the case. Then there's specifically cerebral palsy guidance. But yes, the cerebral palsy guidance helps parents of children with cerebral palsy with information. And my logic is that if the information is, so good that it's for the actual parents of CP children themselves, it'll definitely help in the classroom. They offer articles on many, many topics. The goal is to connect as many people as possible in the cerebral palsy community, which is always amazing. Then there's the Brooks Publishing Company, which is a place to find resources, which helps teachers of inclusive classrooms be able to assist all their students' potential to learn and grow and belong, which is very important. Brooks believes any child deserves to reach their full potential, and you can't really argue with that. No matter what their ability, background, learning difference, or challenge may be, it shouldn't halt their potential, and that's sort of the byline of Brooks Publishing Company. Once again, not specifically for cerebral palsy, but I would still go say hi to them and their books. 4 is Teaching for Inclusion. It's a website, it's an amazing website, that gives suggestions for creating and teaching suitable and interesting lessons for inclusive classrooms. It provides a tool which allows teachers to create individualized plans for the kids, and it also can help diagnose issues in your classroom environment and give suggestions on how to fix that. The last one is Teachnology, whose goal is to provide resources for teachers to improve education. Once again, lessons plans, worksheets, rubrics, teaching tips, worksheet makers, web quests, math worksheets, and other resources. And it's designed specifically for K through 12. Once again, not for CP specifically, but just an amazing resource in general. And lastly, there is that building in Livingston, which is the Cerebral Palsy Foundation of New Jersey, which is a place for families and people with cerebral palsy themselves to go and find out as much information as well as to seek community and aid in any way they so choose. They're all amazing places to go. So yes, that's the very long cerebral palsy PowerPoint presentation. I have been Kristie Petillo, and thank you so much for listening to my many lists.